Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever the world you are. Again, here we are with Microsoft Learning Rooms Zero to Hero with another session in another Saturday. Thanks for joining, thanks for the time you're taking to expand your knowledge, your experience with great professional speakers we are having in a weekly basis with the monthly calendars. Today we have Rolf Schutten with the subject of AKS and Azure Draft, a dynamic tool for containerization and deployment. So welcome again. I'm not gonna take that much of time, quickly gonna move forward with my slides and then we'll quickly bring up Rolf on this stage to continue with this session. So Microsoft Learn, as usual, we always talk about Microsoft Learn. So make it your homepage because it's the richest place ever that you can find content about Microsoft products and technologies. You can continue to learn for free, take exam practices before going to the actual exam, join to learning rooms such as Microsoft Zero to Hero and other learning rooms in other tech category you're interested or your profession is, and this is actually a great opportunity to connect with professionals, with learners, with the students from all over the world, all together in a Teams channel to chat, ask your questions, ask for experiences, share your experiences, and this is what we love to do in the community, and that's the spirit. So as usual, again, make it to your homepage, on your phone, on your laptop, so try to check it like once or twice a day. It really helps to advance the knowledge. Probably you've heard about Microsoft Applied Skills. It's a new type of certifications. However, there are some major and minor differences between Microsoft certifications. So with Applied Skills, you just validate one specific skill instead of broad technical proficiency. Once we used, and we are still taking Microsoft certifications like AZ 900, 104, 305, 700, and so on. With those exams, with Microsoft certifications, you have to prove a broad range of skills in order to get certified and get the certification. However, the goal for applied skills is that you focus on one specific skill. For instance, in this case, let's say Azure Monitor. So you go in a project-based exam. In a live scenario, you have Azure portal, you have a project, you have tasks. So you execute all those tasks one by one. And at the end of the laboratory, it evaluates how was your configuration, and then you get a score report. And fortunately, let's say you get also an exam certificate if you pass applied skills. And the other differences it is scenario specific skills that you need to prove. However, again, as mentioned here with Microsoft certifications, you need to prove a broad breadth of skills once you are in the exam. So with certifications, it's exam with interactive elements. You need to drag and drop multiple questions, multiple choices, one option and a single choice questions. And with applied skills, it's assessment via interactive lab experience, also as mentioned earlier. Last but not least, with certifications, you always need to schedule before and then show your identities to the proctor during the exam, and then exam will be released for you. However, with applied skills, it's always on demand, and you can start the exam whenever you want, and you are ready for that. For this session, as usual, we have a best question exam discount voucher for 50% for fundamentals and advanced exams. So get ready, prepare for questions, prepare your questions for Rolf, and at the end of the session, he will be choosing most challenging and most the best question. So we will be getting in touch with you to provide the exam voucher and preparing for the exam certification. With the next topic, we have Microsoft Next Gen Heroes together with the Student Ambassador community, the Student Ambassador program from Microsoft, together with the cooperation of Microsoft MVP communities and Microsoft Learn Tech Community Learning Rooms. So follow the channel. Also, there's all the news about Next Gen Heroes also published within Microsoft Zero to Hero LinkedIn page, and also as well as also other social media platforms. We have sessions with the student ambassadors. There are 3 student ambassadors currently we are working together. They are leading the program. They are having sessions, bringing the students and refreshing the knowledge, sharing their experiences. We are so excited about it. Looking forward to see you also in Next Gen Heroes. It's my last slide, code of conduct, being aware of each other, being friendly and patient, welcoming, respectful, open to question and viewpoints, understanding differences, and being kind and considerate to others. With that said, I'm going to bring Rolf to the stage. Hi, Rolf.
Hi, Amit. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. And how are you today?
I'm
Welcome.
good. I'm very good. I'm very
Amazing.
good. Very excited to share my 2 cents here today, and hope it will be a learning experience for some, and maybe something fun to try out for others. Yeah, very excited, and thanks once again for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thanks for the time. Just one question before bringing your slides up. What's your recommendation or what's your opinion about Microsoft Learn?
About Microsoft Learn. Well, one of a very good suggestion is that you make it your homepage. I'm pretty excited about the route that Microsoft chose to integrate Microsoft Docs with the actual learning experience and doing it in different tracks. So it makes it a very accessible way to prepare for specific exams. But also, if you don't really care for certification or want to do those exams, still you can follow some tracks around a very specific topic that might be in one or more certification tracks. So for example, we're talking AKS today. Containerization is either in the AZ 104, in the AZ 305, but it's also in the AZ 400. And there might be some topics that go across those different certification paths, but you can still find the specific modules within Microsoft Learn without having to learn from your book about one specific exam. So I'm very pleased that Microsoft has gone this route, and it helps a lot with finding the right information for the right purpose.
Amazing. Thanks for the great feedback. Perfect. So I'm gonna bring up your slide, and stage is yours. Good luck.
Stage is mine. Thank you. And once again, thank you for joining this session today about Azure Kubernetes Services and Azure Draft. And indeed, a dynamic duo when it comes to containerization and deployment. So one of the fun things about being a speaker and presenting these kind of sessions is you get the chance to talk about yourself, and I love to talk about myself. So this is me. My name is Rolf Schutten. I live in the Netherlands. And I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP in the technology areas of infrastructure as code and Azure management. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. And I work at Conclusion, which is an IT service company within the Netherlands, where I am proudly responsible for a variety of different engineering teams. So I'm also pretty easy to find on social media, and I try to be as active as I can get. And if you like to connect with me, feel free to do so. So actually, today's session, I run a podcast which is called Azure Talks, together with Robin Smorenburg, another Microsoft Azure MVP in the cloud native technology area. And this session today started with the recording of a podcast episode with Steve Buchanan, who is the senior program manager at Microsoft. And for reference, everything that I'm covering today can be found on my blog as well, including templates and links to my GitHub repository, so you can create your demo environment or use the application that I'm using today to follow these steps step by step. So you can just re-roll it after the session today. But as I love to talk about myself, we are not here today to talk about me. We're here to talk about Azure and Azure Kubernetes Services and Azure Draft specifically. So enough about me, and let's dive into today's session. So today's session will not be a very detailed and highly technical workshop on Azure Kubernetes Services or containerization or all the other topics around it, like CI/CD and whatsoever. So in today's session, I want to present an accessible way to get started with AKS and containerization to maybe people that are new to it and want to get started on this topic, or to show you a way that you can do things in your workflow a little bit easier or more efficient, even if you are already a veteran within the cloud native and Azure Kubernetes landscape. So first, I will introduce you to the AKS construction helper, and then I will demonstrate it in action, obviously, and we'll go do the same for Azure Draft. So we will walk quickly through the overview of Azure Draft, and then I will pop up my screen and we'll go containerize an application as well. So let's start with the AKS construction helper. And all kinds of detailed configurations can be made with Azure Kubernetes Services within your cluster and beyond within your nodes and whatsoever. So if you haven't designed and deployed an AKS cluster before, the amount of options can be quite daunting, challenging. You might maybe even get a little anxious about all those different options that you get to configure. And it can be very time consuming to reduce your efforts in the portal experience as well to, let's say, infrastructure as code. So the AKS construction helper is a web app developed by Microsoft that provides a guided experience to create AKS environment. And it provides templates and deployment scripts to quickly create a fully configured Kubernetes environment on Azure. And it allows you to tailor it to meet your, well, let's say your operational and security needs, your compliance needs, ready to run your workload, for example, in production. And it does that by dynamically generating the parameters to call the infrastructure as code and provides deployment options using the Azure CLI and using JSON for your imperative deployments, but it also supports Terraform or Bicep or even reusable workflows within GitHub Actions. So more for your decorative approach. And it might be the best just to show you how this web app looks like, right? So let me open my web browser. And after I've showed you the web app, we're going to deploy a Kubernetes cluster using the Azure CLI for demo purposes. But remember, there are other ways to do this. So when you go to azure.github.io/AKS construction, you will get within the AKS construction helper. And the AKS construction helper has some views, I may say, to look through towards what environment you want to create. So in this case, we are looking at the principle-driven view. And first, you get your operational principles where you can say, I just want a simple barebone cluster, all the way up to I want to manage an environment. And I'm not going to narrative all this down because there's quite a lot of text on it. But do yourself a favor if you're interested. Read all of this before you go to deploy your first cluster. And there are all kinds of bells and buttons that you can choose from. So here are your parameters or your variables, if you would like, that you can fill in for, let's say, your cluster name, your resource group, and the managed resources that are within a different resource group. You can even give in your Kubernetes version. So I gave in the latest supported version. But if you want the LTS version of 1.27, you can put that in as well. In my case, because we're going to push an image later from the Azure Container Registry, I also give it the permissions to do ACR push. And you can play around with all different cluster details and add-on details, like how do you want to scale, what different nodes, SKUs do you want to use for your node VMs. Whether or not you want to auto-upgrade your clusters, if you want to do AAD integrate or enter ID today, if you will. And there are quite some interesting details that you can choose from, whether you want an Nginx ingress controller or you want to use an Azure Application Gateway. There are some monitoring capabilities as well. There are Azure Policy capabilities. So there's a lot to choose from. So it's wisely that you just read around before you go and deploy something. So what we're going to do today is we'll use the Azure CLI, which is when you scroll down after you filled in all the parameters and configuration options that you want. And we'll actually use this code for the demo. We'll go after this talk about the web app. But you can also use PowerShell, or you can use reusable workflows in GitHub Actions. You can actually use Terraform. So here are all the different Terraform files for your provider, and there are even a different variable file. So you're not using only static parameters. And you can actually just grab the JSON file here for your, let's say, ARM templates or your bicep deployments. Like I said, you have the view for the principle-driven deployment, but you can also use the Azure Landing Zone view. So this works closely with the AKS Landing Zone Accelerator, which you can read on Microsoft Learn, actually. So on Microsoft Learn, we talk about all these different landing zone accelerators, and the AKS Landing Zone Accelerator is one of the, well, let's say, opinionated best practices, part of the enterprise scale architecture and the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. And the AKS Construction Helper walks you through the different options that you get when you want to deploy these kind of solutions at scale. You can also look at the AKS Secure Baseline, which is more a good option to look at if you are more regulated. So let's say if you're in the financial services industries, it might be quite interesting to use this view. And for the Minecraft gamers among us, you can even run Minecraft server configurations from this web app to deploy it on the same way. So there's quite an extensive documentation about the AKS Construction Helper, and there are different templates and examples within this repository. So yeah, if you are interested in using this, then this might be a very good starting point as well for just looking through some examples of different configuration options that people tend to use. Let me get back to my slide, because before we go into the demonstration, there are actually some prerequisites. And for the demonstration as shown in a minute, I'll be using Azure CLI, and you will need to have kubectl and kubectl login installed. And it's always a good idea to use a good code editor or IDE. So I will not be using Visual Studio Code today, but Visual Studio Code is still one of the greatest code editors. And well, let's be honest, I'm a Dutch guy, so I tend to look at money, and Visual Studio Code comes at no cost. So for most people, it's a no-brainer to use Visual Studio Code because of all of the different add-ons and extensions you can download for it. But let's dive in deploying the Kubernetes cluster. So I'm already logged into Azure CLI using the AZ login command. And I will actually run the code that we saw earlier on the web app for the AKS Construction Helper. So the first one was the Azure Group Create, and in this case, I'm using North Europe. And obviously, when you create a resource group, it will succeed very, very quickly. And the reason that I'm now using 002, and for the people that tend to look at details, here is 001. I actually already deployed it this morning, because for the people that have deployed Kubernetes before, they know that a Kubernetes cluster might take a while for being totally successfully provisioned. So, but just for demo purposes, and we'll let it run while I'll go through the rest of my presentation. But just for demo purposes, you can see here that it actually works when we run this command by doing a deployment from the template that AKS Construction Helper on GitHub is actually providing to us, and these are our parameters. So it's actually running now. And instead of waiting while this is done, because this can take 5 to 10 minutes, I think it's wise for everybody. I mean, it's like weekend and Saturday, and let's not waste time and look at this cursor running. And let's just continue with our presentation. Azure Draft. So, like I said, while AKS cluster is deploying, we can talk about Azure Draft. And Azure Draft is a tool that streamlines application development and deployment into a Kubernetes cluster. And actually, it's not solely for AKS, but that's what we're focusing on today. And Azure Draft is actually one of the acquired technologies and the companies behind it by Microsoft in recent years. And it's not really new. I mean, Azure Draft has been, when it was called just Draft, it's been around quite some years already, but it's being very, well, the development teams work very hard on it, and it's quite a mature CLI tool right now. And just by using 2 simple commands, developers can leverage this tool, hacking on container-based applications without even requiring Docker or installing Kubernetes themselves. So what it actually does is Azure Draft takes a non-containerized application and it generates the needed artifacts like the Docker file or the deployment manifest to containerize it and make it ready to deploy it to your Kubernetes cluster. And of course, we have to talk about the different capabilities and functionalities of Azure Draft, because it can do more than just generate the Docker files and the manifest files. With just a few commands shown on the slide, you can generate a GitHub Actions deployment workflow. You can create your OpenID Connect connection to your GitHub account. And you can, well, as it says on the screen, you can do a lot more. So you can print the supported language and deployment types. You can make your application automatically accessible to the internet. And the great thing is that Azure Draft by default supports all different kinds of programming languages like Node.js, Ruby, Python, PHP, Java, Golang applications. And however, I did not mention .NET applications. Even their Draft can be customized to support those applications as well. And I have to admit, I haven't tried that one out, but I know it's possible. So to use Draft, you need to have a recent version of Go installed on your workstation. And the installation of Azure Draft can be done by, let's say, Homebrew, Winget, can be done by Chocolate, or just manually. And a step-by-step guide can be found on the Draft website. We can go quickly over there. So if we go to the Azure Draft GitHub, which is github.com/azure/draft, they have a very great extensive documentation as well around what the different commands do and what flags or command prompts you can use, if you will. And they also tell you what prerequisites you have and how you can install it by using Homebrew or using a script. However, there is one slight thing within this documentation, and it tells you Windows is currently not supported. For the people that are paying attention, they see that I work on a Windows system right now, because at the latest release, they actually made it happen and made it supported for Windows. So here you have your Darwin or macOS releases. Here you have your Linux releases, but we also have Windows today. So don't get fooled by the documentation. Probably will have to do a pull request towards the Draft team to get this one out, but it works on my system, so it will probably work on your system as well when you are running Windows. And if you scroll down further, you will have a lot of more information. If you click through this documentation, you will probably get all the information that you need. Back to my presentation. So Draft is also supported through Visual Studio Code through the AKS DevX extension. And you can also use it in the Cloud Shell of Microsoft Azure, so in Azure CLI, through the latest AKS Preview extension. And before we hop into the demo, I would like to show you that I'm not just fooling around about containerizing this application. I will actually show you that I'm currently running an application locally. And back to here. And I had to choose between Star Wars and Pokemon, right? So everyone loves Pokemon and Star Wars, and I have gone with creating a simple single-page web app, being a Pokédex. And this is actually the application. If you look here, it's running localhost. And this is a Node.js application written in React, and we will be trying to containerize it today. So I will also show you the different files. Let me get it up. So here we have just my application, which is nothing more than just my source code and some different, like my fave icon, but nothing more than that. So you actually see here that it's running locally. So I'm not trying to fool you guys around. We're actually going to containerize this application today. Let me quickly check if my Kubernetes cluster is already deployed. So yeah, it's done. So let's go over to the Azure portal to show you what had just happened. So like I said, this is the one that I created this morning. And to show you that I have actually done it this morning is 6 hours ago. So you know that I've deployed this 6 hours ago. And this is the one that we just deployed a few minutes ago. So you see here, 3 minutes ago, we have deployed this, this resource group. And within this resource group, we actually now have, this is my managed cluster I see. So let's go over here. We have our AKS cluster and we have all the different options that we deployed with it. So our metric alert rules for our monitoring. We created a container registry. We created a log analytics. So these are typically the resources that come with the options that you picked from the deployment option within your AKS construction helper. Going back over here, I'm going to use the cluster that I deployed this morning. So let me get the AKS credentials first so that I can interact with it. And let me check if the nodes are up. And they are working. Great. So let's get back to our presentation. So actually, when we are going to use Draft, there are some prerequisites here as well. And there are quite a few. So again, we will need the Azure CLI and the kubectl login to interact with our Kubernetes cluster. But to use Draft, we'll need to install Golang as well, because it's a tool that is written on Go. And we will need the GitHub CLI because we're going to interact with GitHub as well. And obviously we need Draft, and I will be needing Node.js because my application is running on Node.js, but that's only for the purpose that I can show you that I'm running it locally at this moment. So it's not a prerequisite to install Node.js to containerize the Node.js application. I have just listed it out here because I want to run it locally and demonstrate it to you. So let's head on over and containerize this application. So I'm here in my in my demo app folder. So these are the files that I just showed you. It's just the source folder, the public folder, and the package.json, like the most of the Node.js applications. And we're just going to use the draft create command to start the containerization process. And it immediately detects that it's a JavaScript application, and it asks me to enter the port that is exposed within the application. So this, by default, it's port 80, which is HTTP. If you want to run it on HTTPS or you're using different hosting ports, then obviously you need to put in another port. But for this moment, we're going with 80. It's going to ask us, what type of deployment files do we want? Are we going to generate Helm charts, customized configurations, or just manifests files? And for this demo, I will go with manifest files. And again, it's going to ask us for the purpose of creating the service deployment, which we're going to interact with when it's hosted on the AKS. What port should be exposed in the application? So again, we're just using 80 because I'm not going to deploy an SSL certificate for this demo. We'll just go with, let's call it Pokedex Hero. Let's just go with the default namespace. Obviously, this for demo purposes only, people. If you run this in production, you might want to isolate it within its own namespace. We'll call the image Pokedex Hero as well. And the funny thing is, let me show it on the screen. We now have different files generated by Azure Draft. So if you go into the demo app, And I see I'm actually in the wrong folder. Let's open this up here. Downloads, demo app. So if we go here, you see that it has created a Docker file, the manifest files, which is for the deployment of the actual application and the deployment of the server within the AKS cluster. And it created a .docker ignore as well. So just to prove you again that I'm not lying, it's actually in the same folder. And it's always a good idea to inspect your files, right? So if we open, let's use it on Visual Studio Code today. If we open this file, you can actually see a very small Docker file, and actually it's using an old version of Node, because I think nowadays we're on 20 LTS. But it's been a while when I created this Pokédex application, so we'll just roll with it because I know that this works. But as an IT pro or a developer, you always want to check any automatically generated files, right? So if you would rather want it to run on Node.js 20, you will just put in 20. And the same goes for the other files that are in here. So let's just quickly open our deployment file. And you'll see here the typical parameters and the typical YAML file that you would expect from a deployment within AKS for your application. Back to my command prompt. So we've now created the artifacts for our application. So it's actually containerized right now. And now it's time that we create a GitHub repository and set up the OIDC connection, because we want to automate our workflow. We want to use GitHub Actions to actually, whenever we make any changes to our code and we put it in our repo, we want to automatically let it deploy and pull it the latest. We want to deploy it to our Azure Container Registry, and we want it to push it to the AKS cluster. So first, I'm going to create a new repository. You can also do this manually on the GitHub website. Obviously, I'm already logged in using GH out login using the GitHub CLI, but you can also do this on the web page. So let's create the OIDC connection using the setup GH command, and I will do a verbo so you can actually see what's happening over here. So the first thing that we need to do is enter an app registration name. And this is the identity that will live in Entra ID for authentication purposes. So let's call this Pokédex Hero as well. And it's checking if the Azure CLI is installed. And after this, it will actually look if the Pokédex Hero already exists. If not, it will create the identity. Let's go with demonstration sponsorship. So now it's asking me the resource group in which I need to put in my my AKS and my ACR later. So I will put in the 001, like I mentioned in the demo on the portal, just for quick reference. That's this one. So my organization, my name on GitHub is Rolf Schutten, and my repo name that we just created is Pokédex-Hero. So it's seeing it's logged into GitHub. It's actually now trying to see if the app is already existing. The app is created successfully. The service principal is created successfully. And if everything goes well, we will see a happy message in just a few seconds. And I will walk you through it on GitHub and on the Entra ID on my Azure portal. Successfully, we like to see that. So moving back to the Azure portal. No, wait, let's go to GitHub first. So in my repository, we see here, updated 2 minutes ago, Pokédex Hero. And it's empty because we haven't made any code commit, right? So we haven't pushed any code yet. But what we can see is actually the secret variables that we just saw in our code, that it has created some repository secrets for retrieving the client ID, the subscription ID, and the tenant ID. And these same variables are within the app registration that we just created. So we created Pokédex Hero. Here it is. And when we look at Pokédex Hero, we see that it has created the federated credentials that it uses to do its magic. And this client ID is now living here. So I can change it. I'm not doing that right now. I'm not going to mess around with my automations. But we see that it has already created an identity in Azure, and it has made a link to our GitHub repository. So the next thing that we want to do is actually create the GitHub workflow, because when we look in our repository on GitHub, we see that there is no workflow yet. So there's no GitHub action workflow created yet. So we will do that by just using draft again, using the generate workflow command. And now it gets interesting because it's going to ask us whether we want to use the Helm charts customized configuration on manifest files. And as we have generated manifest files, we will use that. And we'll just go with the default. Let's go with main. And now we need to give in the ACR resource group, which, if I remember correctly, and I need to do this right, is RG draft test North Europe 001. And I'm not going to guess the registry name. Let's just retrieve it from the Azure portal. So 001. This is my container registry. Copy it back to my. Please enter the container image name, which we named Pokédex Hero. Now it's asking the same for my AKS cluster. And the cluster name, which is this one. This is our Kubernetes cluster. Enter. So by default, it looks in the same folder, which we are now, demo app. And I just showed you earlier that the Docker file is actually within that root folder. So we can go with the default. Same for the Docker build context. And we are using the default namespace. So now we have successfully created a GitHub workflow for our project. And again, let's check that one out. So going to the demo app, we now see that there is a folder created called .github. Here's our workflow. And here we see that we have the YAML file describing our pipeline or GitHub action workflow, if you will. And here it's calling these secrets again that we have just created within our GitHub repository, and it's doing all its magic. So now comes the fun part. We're going to watch if it's actually working. So let's initialize an empty GitHub repository. Let's add all the files within the folder to the repository. Let's commit with a message, hello, Microsoft, learn, enter. Let's point it out to our main branch, which we gave in. We're going to point it out to our freshly created GitHub repository, so Pokédex.hero. And let's push our code. And let's head on over to our GitHub repository and see if it's actually working. So we're here at the GitHub Actions, and if I refresh it now, there should be Pokédex Hero Actions. You actually see the files here already being pushed to our repository. It's not empty anymore. We see here the hello Microsoft Learn, and it's building an image. This might take around 3 minutes for my application. The bigger the application, the bigger the Docker file, the more time consuming it will be. But you actually see here that it's using Node version 14. And we will see all those layers to bake our image. As for the people that have worked with Docker and containers before know that it is actually built on in layers, and we see that process being done right now. So once again, this might take a minute or 3, depending on how big your application is. Just let's give it a few minutes to run. And after this building, this image is done, it will actually deploy it to our Kubernetes cluster. So if everything went well, we will have our Pokédex application live on our AKS cluster and accessible by everyone on the World Wide Web to use our amazing Pokédex application. I know you see all these warnings. It's because I'm using an older version of Node.js and the Node modules that I'm using. Like I said, it has been a while that I created that application, but for demonstration purposes, I think it works just fine to show the power of Azure Draft. It's now pushing all those different layers towards our container registry in the image name Pokédex Hero. When it's done, we can actually take a look within our container registry as well, just to prove that it's being pushed. So you actually see here that it's already being pushed. So we know that that image now exists within our repository. Doing its post-run action, and we actually see that it's completed right here. So it's now deploying to our Kubernetes cluster. This takes just a little bit shorter, so approximately a minute or so. So it's logging in using the OIDC connection, and it's logging into the cluster, validating that it has the ACR push permissions to do so, and it's now deploying the application towards the Kubernetes cluster. Shouldn't take too long. And there it is. So now when we go check our pods, we see that it's running the Pokédex Hero application. And let's get the service that we deployed as well. And we see that it has given it an external IP. And if I have done everything correctly, then we can now go to, I will close this one, this localhost. We should get to our Pokédex application using this IP address, and there it is. Fully functional, running from our AKS cluster. So we have now containerized a simple Node.js application and deployed it using a GitHub Action workflow to our Kubernetes cluster without actually doing very hard manual work because we had Azure Draft to help us. And that was actually what I wanted to show you today. So this is how AKS Construction Help and Azure Draft could make your life a little easier. Nevertheless, there are a number of things that, as a professional, I would like to mention as some key takeaways, because first, you should never blindly rely on automation and tools that do the work for you. So just as I showed you in this demonstration, you should always perform checks and validations, and where necessary, make manual adjustments or enrich your automation. So in my case, again, looking at my application, I was not using a web application firewall. I was not using SSL certificates. I was not using the latest and most supported versions. I'm using a deprecated version of Node modules. I'm using an old version of Node.js. In a production environment, you should not do that, right? So only for demonstration purposes. Also, be vigilant about what you deploy, especially in production environments, because the security and resilience of a solution is only as strong as the weakest link. And the AKS Construction Helper, like I showed in the more of the regulatory view that I showed you, it can help you to choose your operational security principles. But ultimately, it's you as a professional that needs to design or must have a clear picture of what you're deploying. Also, if you work with containers, or with anything actually, you have to expect that something will go wrong at some point. Nothing is more annoying than not having logging or monitoring data available when you need it the most. So start with it on any deployment that you do from day one, including on container environments. And lastly, AKS Construction Helper and Azure Draft are fantastic tools that can make things a lot easier for you as a developer or IT professional. But nevertheless, every demand starts with a proper requirement analysis. So if other tools better match those requirements, then use those tools. And don't hold on to old habits and tools. Be open to try something new. And with that, I would like to close this session. And I hope I was able to teach you or show you something new today. And I would like to thank you for attending and listening to my session today.
Amazing. Thanks much, Rolf. It was a fantastic session. Really loved it. And looking forward to it. So from audience, if there are any questions, please post your questions now. That's the time for question and answers. And as we mentioned, and as we also have this ribbon on the session, so the best question will get a 50% exam discount voucher. So since I have actually one question, so maybe I can come up with a question and during that, so we can also get any questions that we might have. What are the best practices for identity security with AKS?
Ooh, that's a very, very, very broad topic because there's a lot of different opinions about it. But I mean, all things that are that needs to be said about identity and access management has already been said, right? So least privilege, role-based access control. You would be wise to use segregation of duty within your AKS clusters as well. So you don't need the same identity to deploy your application as to just give to your service agent to look in if everything is running correctly, right? So I would really say that those general principles that go widely upon the identity and access management topic specifically count for any container solution as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the integration with the Entra ID is the actual way to proceed, I guess, in this case then.
For AKS, definitely, yeah. So if you go for the Microsoft ecosystem, that's the power, that's the strength of the ecosystem, right? So you would want to I can't really bring on any scenario where you wouldn't want the AID integration when you're using AKS.
Exactly. Yeah, as you mentioned, this is a very broad topic when once it comes to identity access and access management and identity security. Looking forward to see you again, Rolf, and it was an amazing session, and it's really good to have your experiences and knowledge in the upcoming sessions as well in upcoming months. I see no questions. So once we end this stream, the session will be immediately available on YouTube. And if you have any questions, you can post the questions under the post on LinkedIn, YouTube, or other platforms. So we will try to forward your questions to Rolf, or if you, Rolf, see the questions, so yeah, we can just answer the questions if it comes from community. So thanks much for joining. Thank you so much, Rolf, for taking the time Saturday in the weekend for delivering the session, and wish you a great weekend then.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you all.
Perfect.